It sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? They brazenly built their sprawling dream mansion on my land while I was thousands of miles away overseas, foolishly thinking I'd never find out. But when the entitled Homeowners Association, HOA, flatly refused to remove it, I stumbled upon a truth that hit them like a ton of bricks. I owned something they desperately, fundamentally needed: their electrical easement rights. What would you do if you suddenly held the power, quite literally, to plunge your enemies into darkness? The letter, thick and official-looking from my late grandfather's lawyer, arrived on a dreary, rain-soaked Tuesday. Standing in my cramped apartment kitchen, the aroma of brewing coffee filling the air as drips sizzled on the countertop, I nervously tore open the envelope. Inside, nestled amongst legal jargon, was a deed to 10 acres of pristine woodland, a place I'd explored with wide-eyed wonder as a child but hadn't set foot on in years. "Holy cow," I whispered, a wave of disbelief washing over me as I ran my fingers over the embossed official stamp. I owned land, actual tangible land. My boss, predictably, wasn't thrilled when I requested time off. His frown deepened, especially since I'd just committed to a demanding 3-year contract for our company's overseas project in Japan. But an undeniable pull, a need to reconnect with this unexpected inheritance before leaving, gnawed at me. The drive out to Pine Valley took a solid 5 hours, the city dissolving into winding country roads. Faithfully, I followed the GPS directions down increasingly narrow paths until I reached a rough gravel track, disappearing ominously into a dense stand of trees. A weathered hand-painted sign, unmistakably in my grandfather's script, declared private property. Beyond it stretched acres of untouched forest, bordered on one side by the manicured lawns of what looked like an upscale neighborhood called Maple Ridge Heights. I pushed through the underbrush, hiking deeper into the woods. Memories flooded back. Hazy images of childhood summers spent building makeshift forts and chasing frogs near the creek. Eventually, near the border with those fancy houses, I found them. The survey markers my grandfather had pointed out all those years ago. Metal stakes hammered deep into the earth, topped with faded, bright orange caps. Just then, an older man, diligently trimming hedges in a yard that backed right up to the woods, looked up and waved. Curious, I walked over. "Hi there," I said, offering a tentative smile. "I just inherited this land from my grandfather." His face broke into a warm grin. "You must be James Miller's grandson," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I'm Stan Peterson. Your grandfather was a good man, a real pillar. Refused to sell this place 100 times over, maybe more." "Sell? Sell to who?" I asked, intrigued. Stan gestured with his hedge trimmers toward the large, imposing houses lining the edge of the woods. "Maple Ridge HOA. They've been trying to expand for years, always wanting more. Bigger homes, talk of a golf course." A frown creased my brow. "Well, I don't plan on selling either." Stan looked visibly relieved. "Good to hear, son. Real good to hear. But watch yourself. That HOA board doesn't take no for an answer easily, especially not from Victoria Sterling. She's been eyeing the part of your property that borders her backyard for years, like a hawk." "Which house is hers?" I asked, scanning the opulent homes. He pointed towards a gleaming white mansion, ostentatiously adorned with columns. "That one," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "The one with the 3 luxury cars parked out front, like trophies. She's the vice president of the HOA, and frankly, thinks she owns the world." Just 2 days later, I was on a plane bound for Japan, leaving my newfound property in the care of a local management company that promised quarterly check-ins. Between the grueling work schedule and the jarring time difference, however, months melted into each other. Calls home became less frequent. Before I knew it, unbelievably, 3 years had vanished. When I finally returned, utterly jet-lagged, but buzzing with anticipation to see my woodland sanctuary again, I found my access path blocked. A heavy chain was strung across the entrance, adorned with a stark construction zone, no trespassing sign. Confusion quickly turned to a knot of dread in my stomach. Parking my car hastily, I found another route, hiking through the familiar trees, drawn by the unmistakable jarring sounds of heavy machinery. What I saw when I broke through the clearing stopped me cold, stealing the breath from my lungs. A massive house frame, skeletal against the blue sky, stood defiantly in a freshly cleared expanse. An area I knew, with chilling certainty, was my land. Workers swarmed the structure, installing windows, while landscapers aggressively shaped the raw, barren dirt into what would soon be an elaborate backyard. Directing a dump truck, where to unload decorative gravel, stood a blonde woman, shielded by expensive sunglasses, radiating an aura of impatient authority. Something about her posture seemed vaguely familiar, though I was certain we'd never met. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice tight with rising anger as I approached. "What is going on here?" She turned, her expression instantly shifting to one of annoyance at the interruption. "This is a private construction site," she snapped, her tone dripping with condescension. "On private property." "I agree," I shot back, struggling to keep my voice even. "It is private property, my property." The woman's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose theatrically above her sunglasses. "And you are the owner of this land," I said, extending a hand that trembled slightly, more from adrenaline than fear. "And you must be Victoria Sterling." Ah. Her polished smile vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "How do you know my name?" "Stan Peterson mentioned you years ago," I replied, letting the name hang in the air. "Said you'd been interested in expanding onto this property." She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes as cold and blue as glacial ice. "This parcel," she stated, her voice clipped and precise, "was purchased legally from the Maple Ridge Heights HOA 6 months ago. I have all the necessary paperwork." "That's impossible, Lane," I countered, the ground seeming to shift beneath my feet. "I never sold this land, not to the HOA, not to anyone." Victoria Sterling let out a short, brittle laugh, like ice cracking. "The boundary lines were reassessed during your absence," she said, practically spitting the word. "This section was determined to be part of the Maple Ridge Heights common area, which was subsequently and legally sold to me for my dream home." She gestured grandly towards the half-built monstrosity behind her. "As you can see, we're well underway." My stomach twisted into a painful knot. Bile rose in my throat. "This isn't right. These are my grandfather's woods." "Not anymore," she retorted dismissively, turning away. Then she paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "If you have concerns, you can certainly speak with our HOA president, Gregory Vance. But honestly, don't waste your time. We have excellent lawyers." I stood frozen, watching her walk away, already typing furiously on her phone. Within minutes, a sleek black SUV pulled up, and a man in an expensive, tailored suit stepped out. Victoria pointed directly in my direction, talking rapidly. A chill ran down my spine. Feeling suddenly exposed and vulnerable, I retreated back into the relative safety of the trees, my mind racing. Something had gone terribly, horribly wrong while I was away, and I needed to figure out exactly what, and fast. That night, sleep was impossible. Adrenaline and outrage warred within me. I tore through boxes crammed into my small storage unit until finally I found it. my grandfather's original property maps and the deed, complete with the precise GPS coordinates marking the boundaries. Dawn was painting the sky in pale streaks of pink and orange when I finally got hold of a surveyor willing to take on an emergency assessment, the hefty extra fee feeling like a small price to pay for the truth. 3 agonizing days later, the surveyor's report landed in my hands, confirming my absolute worst fears. Someone, deliberately and methodically, had moved the boundary markers, shifting them a significant 200 feet into my property. Victoria Sterling's opulent dream home stood entirely unequivocally on land that legally belonged to me. As I stared numbly at the damning report, my phone rang, jarring me back to reality. The caller ID simply read, Maple Ridge, HOA. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello? Yes, this is Gregory Vance, president of the Maple Ridge Heights Homeowners Association. His voice oozed a synthetic practice charm that set my teeth on edge. I understand you're claiming ownership of the land where Mrs. Sterling's new residence is currently being constructed. I'm not claiming anything, Mr. Vance, I replied, my voice cold as steel. I have definitive proof. It's mine. Ah, well, perhaps, he continued smoothly, we should meet to discuss this unfortunate misunderstanding. Fine, I agreed, wanting to confront them face to face. Tomorrow, noon, my grandfather's cabin. As soon as I hung up, a text message blinked onto my screen from an unknown number. Back off, or things will get unpleasant. VS. My eyes instinctively flickered towards the construction site. Floodlights now blazed across the clearing, illuminating the scene despite the late hour. Incredibly, workers were suddenly operating on an overnight schedule, the incessant, grinding noise of their heavy equipment echoing ominously through the otherwise silent trees. A cold realization dawned. This wasn't just about land anymore. This was war. At precisely noon the next day, a gleaming convoy of 3 luxury vehicles crunched disdainfully up my humble gravel driveway. Gregory Vance emerged first, tall, silver-haired, radiating an air of forced casualness in a crisp golf shirt emblazoned with the Maple Ridge logo. Victoria Sterling followed, teetering precariously in stiletto heels that immediately sank into the soft ground, making her wobble and scowl. Completing their power trio was a younger man in a sharp suit, clutching a thick leather briefcase, undoubtedly their legal muscle. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me, deliberately not offering my hand. Come in. My grandfather's cabin, though small, was solid and filled with history. I'd spent the morning clearing away layers of dust, arranging the crucial documents, property deeds, the original surveys, my newly commissioned report, pointedly on the old dining table. A pitcher of iced tea sat untouched, a silent testament to the lack of hospitality they could expect. As the 3 visitors surveyed my humble home, their poorly disguised disgust was palpable. This is Mr. Davies, our attorney, Gregory Vance announced, gesturing towards the man with the briefcase. The lawyer offered only a curt, dismissive nod. I decided to cut straight to the chase. You've built a house on my land, I stated flatly, meeting Gregory's gaze, without permission. Gregory forced a smile, revealing gleaming, obviously expensive veneers. Now that's not entirely accurate, he countered smoothly. The HOA commissioned a thorough property assessment last year. It indicated quite clearly that this particular parcel had been incorrectly surveyed decades ago. The corrected boundary places Mrs. Sterling's home squarely within Maple Ridge Heights. Interesting, I said, sliding my grandfather's original survey, yellowed with age but legally sound, across the table, followed immediately by the new one I'd commissioned just days ago. Because according to both of these, conducted decades apart, you're unequivocally wrong." Victoria sniffed disdainfully. "Anyone can hire a surveyor to say whatever they want, including you, apparently," I retorted, my voice dangerously quiet. "The crucial difference is I have the original deed with precise GPS coordinates that match my survey exactly, evidence that stands up in court." The lawyer, Mr. Davies, who had been flipping nonchalantly through my documentation, suddenly paused. I saw him lean in and whisper something urgently to Gregory, whose practiced smile faltered just slightly. "Perhaps, shh," Gregory began again, his tone shifting subtly. "There's been a genuine misunderstanding. These things can happen with old properties, you understand. I'm sure we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement that satisfies everyone." My jaw tightened. "I want construction stopped immediately, and I want the partial structure removed from my land, period." Victoria's face flushed an alarming shade of red. "Absolutely not," she practically shrieked. "We've already invested over $300,000 on a house built on stolen property," I replied calmly, letting the words sink in. "How dare you?" she snapped, her voice trembling with rage. "Do you have any idea who we are in this community? People who take what isn't theirs, apparently," I shot back, refusing to be intimidated. Mr. Davies cleared his throat loudly. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Sterling, perhaps we should discuss this privately before proceeding." While they huddled conspiratorially by the cabin window, I noticed another luxury car pull up. Victoria's husband, a man whose scowl seemed permanently etched onto his face. He stayed outside, pacing agitatedly and chain-smoking. Gregory approached the table again, his tone now attempting a gentler, more reasonable approach. "Look," he said, leaning in slightly, "clearly there's been some sort of mix-up. What if we compensate you generously for the acreage where the house stands? We could offer significantly above market value." "I'm not interested in selling," I interrupted firmly. "Everyone has a price," Victoria interjected venomously from the window. "My grandfather turned down developers offering fortunes for 40 years, I stated, feeling a surge of respect for the man I barely remembered. "I intend to honor his wishes." Suddenly, Gregory's friendly mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "This could become very unpleasant for you, son," he warned, his voice dropping. "Legal battles are incredibly expensive and time-consuming. So is rebuilding," I countered, meeting his gaze unflinchingly, "when you've put $1 million house in the wrong place." The meeting ended abruptly, a clear stalemate. As they filed out, Victoria's husband, Robert Sterling, blocked my path on the porch. He was shorter than I expected, but radiated an intense, menacing energy. "You're making a very big mistake," he growled, his eyes narrowed. "We run this town." That night, the construction noise became truly deafening. Floodlights, strategically positioned, blazed relentlessly until dawn, shining directly into my cabin windows, making sleep utterly impossible. When the roar of heavy machinery finally stopped around sunrise, an army of leaf blowers started up immediately, followed by the incessant, high-pitched beeping of delivery trucks backing up. Exhausted and frustrated, I called the police to report the noise violation. The officer who responded seemed genuinely uncomfortable. "Sorry, sir," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Maple Ridge Heights? They have a special exemption permit for ongoing construction projects. There's really nothing I can do." Later that day, needing concrete answers, I drove to the county records office. The clerk, an older woman named Martha, with kind eyes and hair pulled back in a neat bun, actually remembered my grandfather fondly. "Oh, James Miller, such a lovely man," she reminisced. Then, leaning closer, she confided, "Those Maple Ridge folks, they've been trying to expand for years, always finding loopholes. bending the rules, pushing boundaries. I spent hours digging through dusty, faded maps and property records, a growing sense of unease settling over me. Something wasn't adding up about the HOA's supposed corrected survey. It seemed to have materialized out of thin air, conducted by a company I couldn't find a single trace of online or in any official registry. When I asked Martha about it, she frowned, adjusting her glasses. "That doesn't sound right at all," she murmured. "Any legitimate survey, especially one altering established boundaries, must be filed here." She offered to help. "Let me check who might have requested boundary changes for your specific property parcel." She typed meticulously on her ancient computer terminal, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she looked up, her expression troubled. "Well, this is odd," she said slowly. "According to this record, your grandfather, James Miller, requested the boundary change himself, just last year. The air left my lungs. That's impossible, I choked out. My grandfather died 4 years ago." Martha's eyes widened behind her spectacles. A silent, chilling understanding passed between us. Someone had falsified official county documents. On the drive back, my mind reeling from the blatant fraud, I passed Victoria's construction site. The number of workers had seemingly doubled overnight. At this frantic pace, the house would be finished, a permanent fixture on my land, within weeks. I needed leverage, and I needed it fast. Back at the relative quiet of the cabin, I discovered my front tire had been viciously slashed. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a crudely scrawled note. "Accidents happen in the woods. Be careful." The threat was clear, chilling, and deeply personal. That night, sleep was a forgotten luxury. Just as I finally drifted into an exhausted doze around 2 a.m., the jarring ring of my phone shattered the silence. "Hello?" I mumbled groggily. "Alex? It's Stan Peterson, from next door." His voice was tight with urgency. "You need to come quick. They're cutting down the big oak grove down by the creek." Adrenaline surged through me. I threw on clothes and raced frantically through the pre-dawn darkness, stumbling over roots and rocks. By the time I arrived, breathless and heart-pounding, the sickening sight confirmed Stan's frantic call. 3 ancient, majestic oak trees, trees that had stood sentinel for over a century, lay brutally felled on their sides, their massive trunks oozing sap from the fresh, deep cuts. "They showed up about an hour ago," Stan said, his face grim, pointing towards a tree removal service truck parked nearby. "Said they had permits to clear this section." Filled with righteous fury, I confronted the foreman. He nonchalantly showed me paperwork signed by Gregory Vance, authorizing the removal of hazardous trees on HOA common property. "This isn't HOA property," I insisted, my voice shaking with anger and helplessness. He shrugged, utterly indifferent. "Not my problem, buddy. I just go where I'm told." I immediately called my lawyer, Sarah Chen, who promised to file for an emergency injunction, but warned it might take days, maybe even a week, to process through the courts. By then, the irreplaceable damage would be done. As I stood there, watching helplessly as the crew prepared to assault another magnificent oak, Victoria Sterling drove up in her flashy convertible, top down, despite the early hour. She stepped out, surveying the carnage, the fallen giants, with undisguised satisfaction. "Such a shame about these old trees," she purred, not bothering to hide the smirk playing on her lips. "Definite safety hazard, you know." Her gaze swept over the destruction. "But don't worry," she added condescendingly. "We're planting lovely new saplings. Eventually." "You know this is wrong, Victoria," I said quietly, the devastation stealing the heat from my anger, leaving only a cold resolve. What I know, she replied, her voice hardening, turning sharp as glass, is that you're standing in the way of progress. This sad little patch of woods was never going to stay wild forever, Alex. Maple Ridge needs to grow. Not on my land, I repeated, my voice low but firm. We'll see about that, she scoffed, checking her diamond-studded watch. The county commissioners' meeting is this afternoon, by the way. Did you know the zoning board is voting on some interesting changes? You might want to attend. As she sped away, leaving me amidst the wreckage of my grandfather's legacy, I realized the chilling truth. I wasn't just facing Victoria and Gregory, I was potentially up against an entire system they had spent years manipulating and influencing. My phone buzzed. It was Stan. Alex, I said into the phone, my voice heavy. I need to know everything about the Maple Ridge HOA, who they know, who owes them favors, who they pay, everything. Son, you're fighting a real uphill battle, Stan warned gravely. They've got half the town officials in their pocket. Then I need to find something, I declared, my gaze fixed on another ancient oak, crashing sickeningly to the ground. Something they want, something they need more than my land. I paused, the image of the blazing lights on Victoria's half-built house flashing in my mind. Something they absolutely cannot live without. My fingers, trembling slightly, with a mixture of hope and desperation, fumbled with the rusty latch on my grandfather's old lockbox, a relic I'd almost forgotten about. Tucked beneath faded photographs and irrelevant papers, I found it. A brittle, yellowed document, folded precisely. The county clerk, Martha, had mentioned something peculiar she'd noticed in our family's older records, a detail that hadn't seemed relevant until now. As I carefully unfolded the document, dense legal jargon swam before my eyes, but certain phrases leaped out. Electrical easement rights, Sunbelt Power, Maple Ridge Heights. This couldn't be, could it? Adrenaline surged anew. I practically sprinted back to my car and raced back to the county records office, bursting through the door just before closing time, clutching the document like a lifeline. Martha, thankfully still there, adjusted her glasses as I breathlessly explained my discovery. Ah, yes, she murmured, recognizing the document format instantly. Your grandfather was quite the clever negotiator back in the day. He sold these specific electrical easement rights to the original power company servicing Maple Ridge Heights decades ago. She peered closer at the text. But here's the interesting part. He added a specific clause. See, it states the rights couldn't be transferred, sold, or reassigned by the power company without first offering them back to him or his legal heirs at the original price. So, what happened to those rights? I asked, my heart beginning to pound with a frantic rhythm. Well, Martha explained, tapping her pen thoughtfully, Sunbelt Power restructured back in 2005. Mergers, acquisitions, you know how it goes. These kinds of specialized, localized easement agreements didn't really fit their new corporate business model. They essentially got shelved, just sitting dormant in their portfolio, technically available for purchase by the designated heir, but nobody ever inquired. Until now, they were just waiting. A slow, dawning realization spread through me, cold and sharp. This was it. This was the leverage. This was the weapon I needed. I spent the next 3 sleepless nights fueled by black coffee and grim determination, crunching numbers, calculating risks. My entire retirement fund, my hard-earned savings, even the emergency cash I kept hidden away, everything would be needed. Every single penny. Was it worth the gamble? Was I insane? Then, at 6 a.m., on the 4th day, as the sickening sound of chainsaws echoed from my property line, where Victoria's crews were now cutting down a row of 100-year-old maples to improve her view, I made my decision. The utility company representative, a mid-level manager named Mr. Henderson, looked utterly shocked when I walked into his office later that morning, presenting my grandfather's deed, my own identification, and the original easement contract. "Honestly," he said, scratching his head, "nobody's shown even a flicker of interest in these particular rights for years. We'd practically written them off. 6 nail-biting hours and the terrifying transfer of every cent I possessed later, the deal was done." I walked out of that office practically penniless, but holding something far more valuable. I owned the electrical easement rights, the very flow of power to the entire Maple Ridge Heights development. That very evening, as if orchestrated by some dark comedic force, a creamy, expensive-looking envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a glossy invitation to Victoria and Robert Sterling's housewarming party, complete with a smug, handwritten note scrawled at the bottom. "Come see what progress looks like. Maybe you'll learn something. V.S. My lawyer, Sarah Chen, strongly advised against attending." "Don't engage directly, Alex. Not yet. Let's stick to the legal strategy until we're absolutely ready to move." But a burning need propelled me. I had to see it for myself, see exactly what they had built, gauge the full extent of its intrusion onto my land, and perhaps, just perhaps, gather a sense of the community's mood. Saturday evening arrived bathed in the golden glow of a perfect late summer sunset. Victoria's new mansion blazed with light, a beacon of defiance visible from half a mile away. Cars far more expensive than mine lined the private road. Gregory Vance's gleaming Bentley, Mr. Davies' sleek Tesla, clad in my only decent suit, feeling ridiculously out of place, I walked up the manicured path, carrying an expensive bottle of champagne I couldn't afford, my entry fee into the lion's den. At first, nobody recognized me amidst the throng of wealthy guests. Victoria's home was precisely what you'd expect. Everything oversized, ostentatious, and dripping with money. Marble countertops thick as encyclopedias, chandeliers that likely cost more than my car, and floor-to-ceiling windows facing my woods. "Well, look who it is!" Victoria's sharp voice suddenly cut through the sophisticated party chatter like a knife. "Our stubborn neighbor finally decides to join civilization." Guests turned, cocktails in hand, their faces alight with curiosity, clearly aware of the whispers surrounding the conflict. "Beautiful home, Victoria," I said, my voice even, betraying none of the rage simmering beneath the surface. I meant it, in a way. The sheer scale was impressive. "Especially, I added, letting my gaze drift pointedly towards the back, the expansive back patio, the part that extends a good 30 feet onto my property. A few nearby guests shifted uncomfortably. Victoria's smile tightened, the warmth instantly evaporating. "Let me show you the view everyone's talking about," she declared, smoothly steering me towards the back, where massive glass doors opened onto an elaborate patio complex, fire pits, a fully equipped outdoor kitchen, and a shimmering infinity pool stretched arrogantly towards the tree line. "The previous survey was outdated, you see," she announced loudly, clearly performing for the nearby guests. "The HOA diligently resolved some old boundary discrepancies. Progress sometimes requires flexibility." I simply nodded, saying nothing, which seemed to infuriate her more than any argument could have. Just then, Gregory Vance approached, smoothly inserting himself into the conversation, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Alex, glad you could make it," he beamed, all force bonhomie. "Perhaps this means we can finally put all this unpleasantness behind us." "Actually, Gregory," I replied, turning to face him fully, "I've made a rather interesting investment recently." "Oh?" His tone was instantly dismissive, his eyes already scanning the crowd for more important guests. Yes, I continued calmly, enjoying the moment despite the tension knotting my stomach. I now own the electrical easement rights to the entire Maple Ridge Heights. His champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. His eyes snapped back to mine, widening slightly. That's a ridiculous claim, he stammered. Check the county records, I replied coolly. They were finalized this afternoon, and while you're at it, perhaps you should review the accurate property lines again. The ones confirmed by my new survey matching the original deed. A small circle of curious guests had now formed around us, sensing the brewing conflict. You can't just buy utility rights, Victoria interjected, her voice rising, losing its carefully cultivated composure. That's not how things work. Actually, I countered, keeping my voice level, it's exactly how things work when my grandfather shrewdly included a right of first refusal clause in the original contract. A clause that your apparently excellent lawyers completely missed during their due diligence. Gregory quickly pulled Victoria aside, whispering urgently. Her face flushed with incandescent anger. When they turned back, Robert Sterling joined them, his hand gripping Victoria's elbow possessively, his face a thundercloud. Whatever little scheme you think you're planning, it won't work, Victoria hissed, keeping her voice low for the benefit of the lingering guests, though her eyes blazed. We run this community. The board votes exactly how we tell them to vote. Did you tell them, I asked, my voice still dangerously calm, that you knowingly built your house on stolen land? Robert Sterling stepped forward menacingly. You should leave, now. I agree, I said, carefully placing my untouched champagne flute on a nearby table. After all, I have an important meeting scheduled with the power company first thing tomorrow morning. Apparently, there are some urgent maintenance issues that require immediate addressing in this specific area. As I turned and walked towards the door, leaving stunned silence in my wake, I heard Victoria force a brittle laugh. Some people just can't accept progress, she called after me. But I also noticed several guests watching me, not with hostility, but with distinct expressions of curiosity and perhaps even intrigue. Among them was Mrs. Gable, an elegant older woman who Stan had mentioned had lived in Maple Ridge Heights longer than almost anyone. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded room, and she gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. Outside, the night air felt clean and cool after the oppressive, perfumed stuffiness of Victoria's mansion. Lights blazed from every window, illuminating the elaborate garden paths, the fountains, the state-of-the-art security features. So much electricity, I thought grimly. So many things that relied utterly on the power I now controlled. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah Chen. Documents finalized and filed. We're ready when you are. I took one last, long look at the ostentatious house built defiantly on my land, its lights mocking the surrounding darkness. And for the first time in weeks, a slow, determined smile spread across my face. The game had just changed. The following Monday morning, at precisely 9 a.m., 7 courier trucks pulled up simultaneously outside the pristine Maple Ridge Heights HOA office complex. It was a coordinated legal strike. Each driver carried identical, sealed legal documents destined for different recipients. One set for Victoria and Robert Sterling at their mansion, one for Gregory Vance at his residence, one for each of the HOA board members delivered personally, one for their lawyer, Mr. Davies, at his downtown office, and the final one for the official HOA records. From my car parked discreetly across the street, I watched as the unsuspecting HOA secretary signed for the main package. I saw her eyebrows shoot up as she scanned the first page, her composure visibly cracking. Almost immediately, my phone began to ring. And ring, and ring. It was Sarah Chen. "Delivery's complete, Alex," she confirmed, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "Are you absolutely sure about this timeline? 30 days is incredibly aggressive." "They managed to build most of that house in 4 months," I replied grimly, thinking of the fallen oaks. "They can start removing it in 1. The formal notice was brutally simple and legally airtight. They had exactly 30 calendar days to commence removal of all structures illegally built upon my property and to provide a funded plan for restoring the land to its natural state. Failure to comply by the deadline would result in my exercising my legally acquired easement rights to perform necessary and urgent electrical system maintenance, which would, regrettably, require disconnecting power to specific sections of Maple Ridge Heights, and indefinitely. For the next hour, my phone buzzed non-stop. Calls flooded in from numbers I didn't recognize, board members, no doubt. Angry text messages filled my inbox. An email marked "Urgent Settlement Offer" arrived from Mr. Davies. I ignored them all, letting the silence from my end amplify their panic. Around 2:17 p.m., Gregory Vance himself appeared at my cabin door, looking harried. He hadn't driven the Bentley. Instead, a dusty sedan was parked hastily, crookedly, on my gravel driveway. The mask of charm was gone, replaced by undisguised desperation. "Alex, this is completely unnecessary," he pleaded, waving a copy of my notice frantically. "We can work this out, like reasonable people." "I tried reasonable, Gregory," I replied coldly, not inviting him in. 3 months ago, when I first showed you the correct property lines and the deed, you and Victoria chose to ignore the evidence and continue building." His face fell. "The HOA has called an emergency meeting for tonight," he stammered. You should be there." "Fine," I agreed. "I'll be there, and I'll be bringing my lawyer." The Maple Ridge Heights Community Center that evening buzzed with an energy I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the board members. Dozens of concerned homeowners filled the seats, drawn by the rapidly spreading rumors and panic. Word had clearly gotten out. Victoria and Robert Sterling sat rigidly in the front row, whispering furiously with Mr. Davies, their faces masks of controlled rage. When Gregory Vance called the meeting to order, he attempted a calm, authoritative tone, but his voice trembled slightly. "We, find ourselves facing a rather challenging situation," he began awkwardly, "regarding certain property boundaries and related utility access." Victoria couldn't contain herself. She leaped to her feet, dramatically pointing an accusatory finger directly at me. "He's threatening to cut off our electricity. All of us. This is nothing short of blackmail." My lawyer, Sarah Chen, rose calmly beside me, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the rising murmurs. "No, Mrs. Sterling," she corrected firmly. "This is property law. My client legally owns the land upon which your house is partially built. He also legally owns the electrical easement rights for this development. Rights your own HOA failed to secure or even track. The 30-day notice to remove the infringing structure was, frankly, generous under the circumstances." Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. It was clear most residents were hearing the full, unvarnished details for the very first time. An older man stood up slowly near the back. "Hold on," he called out, his voice gravelly. "What exactly is going on with our electricity?" Sarah patiently explained the situation: the illegal construction, the ignored warnings, the easement rights, the 30-day deadline, and the potential consequences if the deadline wasn't met. As she spoke, I watched the faces of the board members. Gregory looked increasingly cornered, Victoria was practically vibrating with fury, and the others appeared progressively worried, exchanging uneasy glances. Mr. Davies attempted to regain control, stepping forward. "This dispute involves only one specific property line," he insisted, trying to minimize the issue. "It shouldn't concern the rest of the community." "Except it does," I said, standing for the first time, my voice ringing with conviction in the suddenly silent room. "Because your HOA president and vice president deliberately conspired to move official boundary markers on my private property while I was working overseas. They knowingly facilitated the sale of land that wasn't theirs to sell. And now," I swept my gaze across the shocked faces of the residents, "they're hoping you'll all pressure me into letting them keep it. Consequences be damned." The room erupted. Chaos reigned for a moment before Mrs. Gable, the woman who had nodded at me during the party, approached the microphone with quiet dignity. "Gregory," she addressed him directly, her voice carrying authority, "I've lived here for 20 years. Are you telling this community, that our HOA leadership falsified property lines and sold land they didn't own?" Gregory visibly paled, quickly pulling Mr. Davies and a sputtering Victoria into a panicked huddle in the corner. Their heated whispers were audible even from across the room. I saw Victoria's face turn scarlet as Mr. Davies appeared to deliver some unwelcome legal truths, gesturing emphatically towards Sarah and me. After the impromptu, tense huddle, Gregory approached me, forcing a strained smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Alex," he said smoothly, "perhaps we could discuss this privately after the meeting." The meeting was hastily adjourned moments later, amidst a flurry of unanswered questions and promises of further updates. Outside, in the rapidly cooling evening air, Gregory cornered me in the parking lot before I could reach my car. "Let's be reasonable, Alex," he pleaded, his friendly tone completely at odds with the tension radiating from him. "What do you really want?" "I want my land restored to its original condition," I replied firmly, unyieldingly. "The house gone, the trees replanted. But that would bankrupt Victoria and Robert," he argued desperately. "That house cost over $700,000 to build." "Then perhaps," I stated coldly, turning towards my car, "she shouldn't have built it on land that wasn't hers." Over the next few weeks, their tactics evolved, becoming increasingly desperate as the 30-day clock ticked relentlessly down. First came the renewed offers, a different, larger parcel of land elsewhere in the county, in exchange, substantial cash settlements, even lifetime membership in their exclusive community club. When those failed, the threats intensified. Sarah received letters from Mr. Davies outlining years of potential costly litigation. Robert Sterling brazenly approached my boss at the local engineering firm where I consulted, subtly suggesting my personal problems and instability might negatively affect my work performance and the firm's reputation. Thankfully, my boss knew my character and dismissed him curtly. By day 14, neighbors I'd never met began appearing sporadically at my cabin. Some pleaded, talking about falling property values and community harmony. Others were less subtle. "You have no idea who you're messing with," snarled one particularly aggressive man who arrived in a flashy sports car claiming to be Victoria's cousin. "People who cross the Sterlings tend to regret it. Accidents happen." I installed high-resolution security cameras the very next day. On day 17, a welcome visitor arrived. Mrs. Gable brought over a homemade apple pie and some incredibly interesting history. "I've lived here since before Gregory or Victoria ever moved in," she said, settling comfortably onto my porch swing. "And trust me, dear, this isn't the first time they've pulled something like this. The Jacobsons lost nearly 20 feet of their backyard 5 years ago. Suddenly, poof, it was common area needed for drainage. The Millers were forced by the board to tear down their brand new gazebo last year because it supposedly violated new guidelines that were mysteriously added after they built it. Why doesn't anyone stop them? I asked, incredulous. Fear, mostly, she said simply, her eyes sad. Fear of legal fees, fear of retaliation. And the inconvenient fact that Gregory's brother-in-law happens to be a rather influential judge in the county court. But, she added, a spark in her eye, no one's ever challenged them quite like you are doing, Alex. On day 22, I received a deeply uncomfortable call from my own surveyor. Alex, he began hesitantly, someone from Maple Ridge Heights contacted me yesterday, offered to pay me triple my original fee if I would reconsider my findings on your property line. He paused. Said his name was Michael, but I suspect it was Robert Sterling. Didn't explicitly threaten, but strongly implied there might be significant future opportunities if I helped resolve this situation amicably. I thanked him profusely for his honesty and integrity, carefully documenting the conversation and adding another damning piece to my growing file of their corruption. Day 28 arrived with a certified letter delivered by special messenger. It was from Mr. Davies, formally offering, on behalf of the Sterlings, my full asking price for the disputed acre of land, a figure nearly 10 times what the raw land was actually worth. This is it, Sarah advised when I called her, their final, desperate gambit. They're throwing money at it because they still don't truly believe you'll go through with cutting the power. They think you'll blink. That evening, adding another layer to the drama, a local news van pulled up and parked just outside my cabin gate. A young, ambitious reporter approached me, microphone in hand. Hi, she began. We're doing a story on property disputes in rapidly developing areas like Pine Valley. Gregory Vance suggested we talk to you about a potential misunderstanding regarding boundary lines. I smiled faintly. The HOA had tried to spin the narrative their way. A misunderstanding? I repeated calmly. I'd be happy to show you the original century-old property markers, the official county deed, the new survey confirming the boundaries, and the legal documents showing exactly how that boundary line was illegally moved while I was overseas, facilitating the construction you see over there. I gestured towards the looming mansion. Her eyes widened slightly. Clearly, this wasn't the angle Mr. Hammond had described. Okay, she stammered, signaling her cameraman. Let's see it. On day 29th, with less than 24 hours remaining on the notice, Gregory Vance himself appeared at my door again. This time, he arrived on foot, looking utterly drained, without the Bentley or any shred of his former confidence. You've made your point, Alex, he said wearily, his shoulders slumped. We get it. What will it take to end this? Exactly what my notice stipulated from day one, I replied, my resolve absolute. Remove the structures from my land. Begin the process. Be realistic, he pleaded, running a hand distractedly through his thinning silver hair. We can't just tear down a house in one day. You've had 29 days to start, I countered sharply. 29 days to bring in equipment, make arrangements, show good faith. I haven't seen a single moving truck, Gregory. Not one. He sighed heavily, suddenly looking much older. Listen, he tried, shifting to a new tactic. We've contacted the utility company. Our lawyers spoke to their legal department. They say they can't just cut power based solely on your request as an easement holder. You need specific maintenance permits, approved work orders, county inspections. This bluff won't work, Alex. Without a word, I stepped back inside the cabin and retrieved a folder. I handed it to him. Inside were pristine copies of all the necessary paperwork. Fully approved county permits for urgent electrical line and transformer maintenance in Grid Sector 4B, citing potential overload risks due to recent unauthorized construction. Scheduled work orders, signed by a certified electrical contractor, and the final signed authorization from the county inspector obtained just that morning. Maintenance is scheduled to begin tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp, I stated calmly, meeting his stunned gaze. Unless, of course, I see bulldozers and dismantling crews on that property at dawn. He took the folder, his hands shaking slightly as he flipped through the documents, his face paling further with each page. You would really do this? He whispered aghast. Affect innocent families? Cut off power to homes? Only 5 houses reside within that specific grid section, Gregory, and I replied, having meticulously researched the power grid layout with Marco, my contact at the utility company. Yours, the Sterlings, and 3 other board members who actively voted to approve the illegal land sale and ignored my initial warnings. I made absolutely sure of that. The rest of the Maple Ridge Heights community, the truly innocent families, won't be touched. As he walked slowly, defeatedly back towards his dusty sedan, I noticed a small group of residents had gathered silently at the edge of my property line, watching the exchange. Victoria Sterling wasn't among them, but Mrs. Gable was, along with several others I recognized from the chaotic community meeting. They just stood there, watching, waiting. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Getting intel. They're calling another emergency board vote tonight. Sources say they're completely split on what to do. Sterling is demanding they call your bluff. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues behind the remaining trees on my property. Tomorrow would bring either the rumble of heavy machinery beginning the demolition, or an unprecedented darkness falling over the heart of Maple Ridge Heights. They had one last night to choose.